Having a second.
Yeah. This is my second cup.
This is my first, thank you.
Well, good morning, you intrepid Bible studiers. I'm so glad that we're here today and cozy on Bill's wonderful porch. Thank you, keeping out of the dampness.
Yep.
I'm going to start with the collect for. Is Tina on with us today? Not yet.
Not yet, but if,
Oh, didn't she say she had something going on today? I think she
no,
did.
if you see something appear in this column,
Okay.
We'll
let
let
me
you
know,
know.
and I'll have to let her in.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds
All right,
good.
watching that.
You can aim it towards everybody. I don't need to be the main star today.
Secondary star today.
If I have something really important to say, you can turn it. All right, let us pray. Almighty and everlasting God, increase in us the gifts of faith, hope, and charity, and that we may obtain what you promise. Make us love what you command, through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen. So, this coming Sunday, as you all know, we're doing the picnic Eucharist out here. So are you able to come this Sunday? Are you coming? Good. Okay. So just wanted to see if I need to figure out what I'll be preaching on. Interestingly, I have not preached on this gospel yet.
So you have no
There-
past sermons to mine?
No, there's no past sermons to mine. But, well, I mean, I've certainly preached on the Greatest Commandment, but I mean, specifically this text, half of it I love, and the latter portion of it frustrates me. So it'll be interesting to see what you all think. It's just sometimes it's interesting how the timing works out on, like, you can go for 7 years and not have preached on a particular
Isn't that
passage.
interesting?
Yeah, it's just like either
Wow.
you know, you were away on vacation or you had a guest preacher or whatever. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
And even as actually I preached as a lay preacher for almost over 6 years.
Oh,
So
so that's 13 years?
yeah, so 13
Whoa.
years and I haven't preached on this.
That's it?
How could that be?
Yeah, that's. a
Okay,
long time.
so who would like to read the passage? It's Matthew 22, 34 through 46.
I can read if you want me to,
Sure,
and I can do modern or
modern, please.
modern.
This is
Okay.
difficult enough.
Okay. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Oops. Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them this question, what do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he? They said to him, the son of David. He said to them, how is it then that David by the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. If David thus calls him Lord, how can he be his son? No one was able to give him an answer, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions.
I like that part.
So I gotta confess that this part always makes me, it's like PTSD or something, because it reminds me of those math questions when you got a train going one way and a train going the other way, and they're going at this rate of mile per hour, and they're at the station, and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I never get those right.
Yeah.
Because that's not the way my brain thinks.
I remember a discussion of this when in our high school group in church, and
The
someone
train or this passage?
this pastor, and
I remember that train.
they said to him, Davidson, because son of David, Davidson.
Yeah.
And the teacher said, so yeah, would the Messiah be like John Davidson? I mean, come on, give me a break. He's a treacly singer.
I'm just checking. Nope, I don't see anybody. Okay. Couldn't see from that far. So Davidson, yeah, John. No.
You remember John Davidson?
Yes.
He might be a little bit.
He lives in Maine.
Oh, he does? Really?
Yes, he does.
Yeah, he's been on TV. They had him on, what was it, 207?
207.
Yeah.
A
Didn't
couple
he used
of
to have
times.
sort of like the
You wouldn't
brownish
recognize him.
hair? And it was kind of
Blonde, dark
longish.
blonde hair,
Well,
yeah.
now it's all gray, very thick gray. I'm jealous.
He lives down by the coast.
Too funny. All right, so let's go. There are so many things that popped out at me. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to spend 12 hours on them. Barbara, why don't you start if
You
you're
should know
ready?
by now not to start with me. I never have anything to say until a while.
Well, you can say pass and we'll just go around and
Pass.
come back to you. All right. Sandy?
It's loaded.
It's loaded, it's right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one thing that'll pop out is the fact that you can't love anyone else if you don't love yourself. Because if you don't have respect for yourself, you're not going to have respect for others. That does pop out of me, but everything is so deep here.
I know, it's deep waters for sure. All eyes are on Lori.
What? Oh, pass at the moment.
Okay, yeah, we might have to have several readings before we really get into it.
Well, you've already discussed this.
Well,
Come on.
Enemies, well, that's from just a flash from the past. But this, what always bothers me is enemies under your feet. It sounds so vengeful. So that caught my, unless there's a way that crawling under someone's feet is good, I don't know. But that just stopped me.
You ever think of the Egyptians, not the hieroglyphs, they in their tombs and everything else. If you look, you see the king standing there and the enemies are under his feet.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it does sound very hateful, doesn't it?
Yes.
Bill?
How can the Messiah be David's son, but David calls him Lord? This reminds me of all of the passages where the gospel writers and Paul try to reach back into various scriptures they know to proof text that Jesus is the one. And some were more convoluted than others in terms of their argument. And some kind of ignore the initial context, which I guess with new interpretations you're allowed to do. But this feels to me like a legal argument, trying to show Matthew's writing to Jewish readers that, we got this. See, this is what David said.
Right, and it is a legal argument because he's just the Pharisees see a chance. This is like so partisan. Oh my God, it's like you have the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You might as well have the Democrats and the Republicans.
Yeah.
I didn't go there today.
Yeah, I know. Well, so I am. But so you have just it's human nature, I guess, to be divisive. So you got this group over here and this group over here. And Jesus has just silenced the Sadducees, who normally, I think in a lot of arguments, actually, Jesus does side with the Sadducees. So this is interesting that we've got a little shifting of alliances going on here. And and then one of them, a lawyer, you gotta get those lawyers in here, tries to test him. So it's like, it's just this constant manipulation. And it is so like, I mean, I find it very frustrating that there's just this constant wrangling over who's got power and who wants power and who's going to try to take the power. And Jesus, I just love the fact that Jesus shuts them all up. You know, they want so badly to corner him and or somehow get him on their side maybe. And he's just not going to have it. And then I don't know. So I wonder if maybe this whole fighting over who's got power and then the enemy's under your feet, maybe there's something there. I don't know. But
Can I say something else?
yes, absolutely.
And then Barbara, you passed. So
We'll,
we
we'll
have
come
go
back to
you.
Barbara.
Oh, but don't skip.
Well,
Kathy.
Kathy.
And Kathy.
No, we're
Oh,
not-
sorry, Kathy. Kathy, did
You
you?
go ahead.
Well,
I'm thinking.
I'm sort of reminded
You
of
were
the last shall be first and the first shall be last, because have you ever had the experience in your family of a parent acknowledging that a child has a kind of wisdom or has an answer that the parent never had?
Mm-hmm.
And that may be what's going on here with how can David be calling him Lord? Or, you know, that the things can be fluid. I don't know. That just occurred to
That's
me
interesting
because they're I mean, you know. Well, anyway, I mean, I think we've all had this experience in our families. But I don't mean absolutely. I mean, in moments, there are moments when the wisdom of the child is greater than the wisdom of the parent, and yet the parent is still the parent, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So I don't know.
In fact, it does seem like a lot of generations will say that, like, you know, because of our education, the way we approach things, there's some there. I know there's often like I'll be surprised by what I hear from my kids if they.
Yeah, but
say
we have
something.
experiences, we have memories, we have history, and a lot of that blacks out actually some of our innate wisdom. And then the children have none of that. They come out with stuff, and you kind of look at them and going, "Oh my God, that's right," you know, because they don't have those layers, they don't have the filters that we've had in our lives. So they can say things that because they've cut through the clarity because they don't have it.
That's really great. That's a great thought too, because if we're products of our experience.
Yeah.
And there's a great book out there by Anne Primavesi called Cultivating Unity. It's a really awesome book. And she refers to these layers that we accumulate as the theological muckheap, which is one of my favorite phrases.
Well, it's Matthew at the beginning. I just checked. It's Matthew who goes through the long genealogy
Yeah.
to establish that Jesus is descended from David.
Right.
So he is David's son.
Mom and dad.
Yeah, going
Yeah.
on and on and on in that long litany of
Right.
ancestors. So I think there's something here
Yeah.
that David is David's son
Yep.
by many grandson, grand,
Right.
but David is calling him Lord.
Right.
And they can't answer that. They're so bound to tradition and authority, the authority and weight, the legal weight of doing things the way they've always been done. They can't acknowledge that someone alive now could exceed in wisdom or godliness David, who was long dead.
Where
Well,
does it
yeah,
say
and
in
that's
the
the
Bible?
interesting thing about being long dead too. He's making it's like he's bringing it to the present tense, you know?
Where is that Psalm what? The Lord said unto my Lord, sit on my right hand. Where is that in the Bible?
Oh, well, it's in my note here.
Yeah.
Just a second.
So let's hear from Kathy.
Well, Tom just made me think of genealogy.
And that's a good thing, Kathy, right?
Well, it was like, oh, so you're saying that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is the daughter of David.
Great granddaughter.
That's what you're saying.
Mhm.
Right.
So I just had this light bulb moment. It was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It does. So that would be David's bloodline is through Mary,
Yeah.
but obviously the father of Jesus is God. I just hadn't put it in a tree in my head before like that.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. So Mary is that line and Jesus is, the Son of God. But there it is. Wow. Because I do genealogy and I have like one of my ancestors back to like the year 900. So
Wow.
Oh yeah, I've been doing this stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, I
I
know.
kept saying 30 years. Do you know I've been doing this since the 70s?
Ooh.
I've been doing this for over 40 years.
Wow.
Since
I
probably
know
like
you're good.
I'm close to
70.
50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're closer to 50.
You're really good now.
Okay, 50 years. It's like you don't want to admit that you're that old, that you've been doing it this long. I just kept this number in my head. Oh, I've been doing it for 30 years.
Yeah.
Plus
a little notice there.
plus 2 more decades.
Well, actually, this says Psalm
And it's just kind
110.
of funny. And it's funny, when I was at the DAR in
Psalm
Washington
110?
DC,
Mhm, Verse 1.
someone did pay somebody
I haven't checked.
to do the genealogy of Jesus. And so because
You know
It
it's
was there.
somewhere on Google. You know it's somewhere on Google. So
Yeah.
your homework this week is to find the star.
well, I'll tell
I
you.
might need it for an illustration.
I photocopied that whole genealogical
Okay.
thing, but it's just so much to look at. It's overwhelming. So it's sitting in a file. I have Jesus
It's half that,
genealogy,
you have
if you
something
will,
else.
which would be David's, genealogy. I just hadn't thought about it for an awful long time.
Yeah,
But I did photocopy that, and then like you say, it's probably on Google anyway, that you can Google it.
right, but that would be fun to pull that out.
I know, I need to kind of
Oh,
pull that out.
remember, what was the movie? The Name of the Rose? No. It's the one, Dan Brown's
Oh,
book.
Dan Brown's.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right, and he talks about Mary's lineage.
Yeah, so we are talking Mary's lineage through David, which is just lovely to realize that. On another note, when I see this where it says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," my father was never much of a religious person. He always made sure that my sister and I, when it was just my sister and I, my brother didn't come till like 15 and a half years later. But those early days, when I was little, he would bring us to church and make sure we got there, and my mother. And as I got older, made sure I went to my, catechism classes on Sundays and pick me up and all that. But one thing he always impressed on me, and this is the golden rule,
Do unto others, yeah.
yeah, do unto others as you would have them do for you. And so that's what that line just made me think of my dad this morning. So
Oh,
Yeah.
nice, good connection.
sometimes simple is good, even though like I said, he didn't go to church, but he always made sure we did. And sometimes just living under that premise, keep it simple.
Yeah, the KISS method.
The kids method, thank you. That's what I was just thinking of, yeah. So that's what I have for the moment anyway.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Barbara, are you ready?
I wonder exactly how Jesus silenced those Sadducees. Did he do it with a question like this? Did he say, "Silence"? I wonder how exactly he silenced them. But we don't know.
Well, he never silenced them by telling them to be quiet. Not, well, once in a while he'd say, "You hypocrites," but
Well, he silenced the wind that way, though. He just said, "Be still."
yeah, but he was really good at tricking people.
It's just a minor. We're
Tricking
supposed to say
themselves
what
up.
jumps out at us. So the
Right,
first thing
right.
that jumped out at me was silenced. So
Right.
let me finish before you start cross-talking, please. It's interesting to me that Jesus takes all the 10 Commandments and just summarizes them.
I know.
In
That's
two
true.
sentences.
That's true.
So now we've all grown up watching Charlton Heston and the 10 Commandments. And you see that movie of Moses going up there and the lightning strikes the stone and commandment number 1 and all that, and the Jews were so hung up on those 10 commandments, in addition to the prophets, all those writings, and Jesus just comes along and says 2 sentences that summarizes the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then, for me at least, and maybe most of us, I don't think we can help but view this through Trinitarian glasses. You know, you can't help but see the Trinity in the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand, because traditional Christian teaching, you know, teaches that Jesus was pre-existent. He wasn't just born in the flesh of Mary. He was always existent with the Father. So that's what, you know, comes to my mind, that he says David by the Spirit. I think David and the other writers of the Psalms were kind of visionary, or maybe they literally were having a vision, or David, you know, was it a dream or a vision or an out-of-body experience or something? But he was able to pen these Psalms that were kind of futuristic.
Yeah.
I think it's important, I have to interrupt slightly, sorry, Barbara, and then we go
It's
back.
okay, I'm
But,
done anyway, Tom, so go ahead.
Verse 636, his reply 37, they're double quotation marks. And the same thing when the first summary, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. And the second one is also, Jesus is literally directly quoting from Leviticus and, he's not, those are not new words. Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:18 repeat both of those. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul.
But even if they're not original, he just comes up with this summary.
No, what he says is literally from Leviticus and Deuteronomy.
Yeah, but I'm saying it doesn't matter whether he's quoting something or coming up with an original thought. It's still, he's summarizing the entire law.
Well, and that's what it says in Leviticus.
Sentences.
So in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it summarizes the 10 commandments that way. So his audience, the Pharisees, would know that. He's literally quoting the Hebrew summary of the law back to Jewish
Leaders.
fundamentalists. Okay. And so one of the interesting things was, you know, from the time I was 11 until I went off to college, my parents kept going there for years. We attended a church that was also a synagogue. It was a synagogue on Saturday and a church on Sunday. And those commandments were inscribed on the wall because both congregations, and it had the citations under them. We took the cross in and out on Sunday, but the Torah was in an illuminated cabinet behind the altar, and then the inscriptions were on the wall, because just like Micah was on the wall, because there's certain passages from the Hebrew scriptures, in this case, that Jesus himself repeats. And so it's going back to your thought about silencing. Sometimes the most effective way to silence people is to play back to them what they themselves have said many times. And you have to believe these Pharisees many, many times had summarized the law, because Leviticus and Deuteronomy are kind of like the most difficult, objectionable, hard to fathom books in the Torah. And yet that's what Pharisees mastered, right? So they knew the summary of the law from that. Anyway, that's just, it was, by the way, it was great going to that church. We first went there for a bar mitzvah, St. Augustine's, and we had no idea it was a church. We went for the bar mitzvah and discovered it was.
This wasn't the one in Bronxville?
No, this is the one we moved to from Bronxville in Southwest Washington. It's still there opposite Arena Stage, but Temple Micah was able to afford its own building at a certain point. So after about 40 years together, they moved. But my mother was actually joint temple and church secretary for several years.
Really?
Paid by both, and I'll shut up. But the great part was selling High Holy Day tickets, because I was very, unlike I am now. So I said to Mother, oh, how outrageous that the attendees in Temple Micah have to pay money to go to Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. My mother said, we should do that. I don't think Episcopalians should be allowed to come to Christmas unless they fork over the money. And I have to tell one other funny part of that. It was a Reform congregation, so you got the tickets were sold on a sliding scale based on income. You had to pay more if you made more money. So I snarkily said to my mother, well, of course they'll all lie and say they don't make much money. And my mother said, absolutely wrong. It's the other way around. They all say they make a lot more money and have to pay because they don't want to seem like they're poor.
Yeah.
And she said, no, Episcopalians, maybe.
Too funny.
It was a real education.
That
being
is
in
an
that church.
Wow.
We need that story between now and the new year.
Stewardship, yeah.
Yes.
That's
For
a
the
good stewardship.
stewardship.
Yeah.
That's a good point,
Hang on to
yeah.
that.
Well,
So,
one last ironic thing,
Okay.
and then I really promise to say, and not another thing today. So one of my good
Oh, boy.
friends,
We better
where's
take
my
bets
tape
on
recorder?
that.
1979, I met someone who's still a very good friend, and he goes to Temple Micah. So all these years later, I'm not so much in touch with St. Augustine's, which is where I was I was confirmed, and yeah, a teenager. But I am very much in touch with Temple Micah. And Temple Micah, when it moved up to Wisconsin Avenue within a few blocks of the Washington National Cathedral. And when they simplified the campus at Washington National Cathedral, they lost their kitchen and some other things. There's a College of Musicians up there. Temple Micah supplies the kitchens for the Washington National Cathedral.
Oh, I did not know.
Isn't that interesting
That is
for
interesting.
large scale events?
Oh,
Because
wow.
the synagogue has these very large
Wow,
kitchens.
that's
Anyway.
wonderful.
that's very cool.
Another connection between two different religions. I love that.
Mhm.
Nice.
So, I think it's important. Matthew is always trying to make the connection, the tying the tradition together, so that he's trying to say that Jesus is not, just like Paul, not obliterating the law, not denying or negating the law, but is basically revisioning it. Is just looking at it through a new lens. Right? And so I think it would be good to read the Leviticus verse and the Deuteronomy verse, but first we'll do the Deuteronomy verse because it will follow in the same order as the gospel. So if you go to Deuteronomy 6:5, I think it was, I just had it marked, here we go, 6:5. Which is actually that passage, that pericope is headlined in my study Bible as the Great Commandment. And it has the Shema just before that. The Shema is, hear, O Israel, the Lord is verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. That's the Shema. So that's the first thing on the lips of the Jewish people. They would be saying that Shema.
Okay.
And then, but then Jesus ties it together immediately with Leviticus. And I just had that marked. I don't have enough sticky notes anymore. They have all
lose this.
gone the way.
What number is that?
Leviticus, so oh, here we go. Leviticus 19, verse 18. And the problem with Leviticus is that so much of the laws are taken out of context and misconstrued. But if you look at verse 18, actually, if you look at 17 before that, actually I'm backing up,
15.
This is all about your neighbors. Like, you won't defraud your neighbor. You're not going to steal from your neighbor. You're not going to revile people. You're not going to render unjust judgments, etc. You're not going to slander. You're not going to profit by the blood of your neighbor. You shall not hate anyone in your heart. You shall reprove your neighbor, or you will incur guilt upon yourself. And we get to verse 18. So who would like to read verse 18?
Okay. Thou shalt not take vengeance, nor bear any grudges against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am Jehovah.
So right there is like we're not supposed to take it upon ourselves to seek vengeance. The Lord says, vengeance is mine. And then you come back to our gospel, which says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. See, it's God's prerogative to take vengeance, to cause, it's not supposed to be in our hands to take vengeance. That's different from justice. I think there's a difference there.
Oh, yeah.
But if you feel you've been wronged and I've been watching this TV series called Suits. It's kind of an older one, but that's all they're ever doing. These lawyers are just exacting, I'm gonna take down your corporation, and I'm putting it mildly. I'm gonna bury you, and things like that. They're always just
That's vengeance.
right.
That's not justice.
I know it's not justice. So I think Jesus is really trying to get them to look at it a different way. This is what you've heard all along, and you need to think about it in a new way. Just like, weren't there 600, you would probably know this better than me, 613 laws, right? More? Say it.
I told you we should.
You are absolved. Continue.
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
I think that's correct. I
did ask you a question. So. You have to answer the question.
Yes.
I was literally going to throw $1 into the pot.
But yeah, so it says 613 laws,
Yeah.
right? Something like that?
Yeah, and I think that you just made a really interesting point, which David, of course, was a warrior.
Yeah.
And he did kill people.
He did a lot of other
He did a lot.
things.
He wreaked a lot of vengeance on people.
Yeah.
And the wisdom of his descendant is much greater, right?
Yeah.
He's leaving it up to God. Even in, the final passion, when Pilate asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" and he says, "You say it," and he, he doesn't resist. Some of the times he's just completely silent in response, right? Hard to do. But he refuses to be pulled into a cycle of violence, a cycle of vengeance. And part of the tragedy of David is that he is. David ends up, Absalom, his oldest son,
Yeah.
is killed because of the cycle of violence
Uriah.
that surrounds Uriah. Yeah, that surrounds David. So in a way, it's interesting to be reminded we tend to have this very rosy notion about David,
Yeah.
but he was an incredibly flawed person in a way that Jesus is not.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. So we've got some good dialogue now, and we're gonna go around again.
I'm okay now.
So just popcorn style, who wants to speak up?
Well, I was just thinking how the 10 Commandments are written in the negative. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not. And my former Lutheranism is rearing its ugly head again.
That's only
But
the first 4.
Every Lutheran kid in confirmation has to learn the small catechism. And Luther did it in a Q&A format. It's really simple. It's like, what is the first commandment? And then, blah, blah, blah. And then Luther always says, what does this mean? And so you have to respond with, well, it means we shouldn't do this, this, and this, but there's always the flip side of the coin. It means we should care for our neighbors, and, if he's hungry, give him something to eat, and all that flip side of it. And since Tom likes to tell stories, I guess I can tell a few of my own. So when I lived in Charleston, South Carolina, I was a member of this big, huge Lutheran church with 1,700 members, but just a block down the street was the Episcopal Cathedral. And so I used to go down there for occasional things too. And it's been so long, it's been like 27 years ago, but I went to some sort of class that the dean of the cathedral was teaching. And I don't remember what he was talking about, but I still remember the illustration he used. He said, he was talking about Jesus came to fulfill the law. And what does it mean to fulfill the law? We kind of use that phrase and we don't really understand the meaning of it. So he said that to fulfill something is like, and this is the illustration he used, he said, fulfill means not just to fill full. Like if you're having a cup of coffee, you don't really fill it full. You leave a little bit of space so that it doesn't spill.
Yeah.
But to truly fulfill means you keep pouring the coffee into the cup until the coffee spilled over and took on another shape. So it would no longer look like a cup of coffee. It would look like, like the cup is sitting in this big puddle. So it would look like kind of like a screw turned on its end. Can you visualize that?
Mm-hmm.
So that's all I have to say.
So
Jesus
it
came to fulfill the
transforms.
law. The law takes on a totally different shape.
Right.
Wonderful.
Okay.
That's pretty cool.
That
Law
is
takes
really
on a
cool.
totally different shape.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I never pour a cup of coffee the same way again. I'm always gonna think of that.
Well, you see, I spill my coffee all the time when I'm pouring it, so
Well, I did that. One time
that's not the
this
same.
pastor was on vacation and I ended up preaching and I was gonna be really cool and do a real illustration and I had this tray and this pitcher of water and I said, do you see it's taken on a totally different shape? And the congregation just looked puzzled. So I knew it didn't work at all.
Yeah, I know that feeling a lot.
So it's not the best illustration for everybody, I can tell you from experience.
Well, just you're explaining the difference between filling and fulfilling. It's bigger, it's more, it's deeper. That's what I'm getting.
If you
listening
ever-
to you.
I knew I said I wasn't going to talk to you.
that ship has sailed.
We're over it now. So there's this great show on Netflix, Chopped. It's a cooking show, and you can watch it. We watch it one episode almost every night, get ideas. And there are 3 judges, but everyone's given for the appetizer, the main course, and the dessert, basket ingredients, 4 basket ingredients they have to use. And you start with 4 contestants and end up with 1 finally. But you're required to not just cook with the ingredients, but transform them to alter their reality. So for example, you might get, there was a recent one where one of the ingredients was those multicolored puff cereal things that kids have that are highly sugared.
Okay.
It was astounding because they always do that. They always have these wild ingredients in them. And it was amazing to see these chefs take that and come up with something fantastic. Because we're sitting there thinking, we have some really old things sitting in the cupboard, which we ought to rethink. But
Yeah.
That's fulfilling. That's transforming them.
Transforming.
And they achieve a totally different potential that way, and actually become nutritious and healthful again when they weren't in the first place.
Oh no, I've been stricken with storytelling-itis today, and now I have to tell another story.
Good.
Well, it's not a story, but it's just something I read yesterday. So I subscribe to the New England Synod. It's like our dialogue, only, so the Lutheran Bishop of New England was talking about how we're going to do Christmas this year with the pandemic. And so he didn't say you should do this and this and this, but he just said, basically think outside the box. And so as a suggestion, he said, for example, you can't have your traditional Christmas Eve service, so don't take it outside and try to duplicate all the things that you would typically have. He said, maybe have your service at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and have stations of the nativity, like Stations of the Cross only form these Stations of the Nativity, have people wearing costumes over their LL Bean parkas. Just transform Christmas Eve into something totally different.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a great idea.
Well, yeah, because we get locked into these visions of what Christmas is. And like there was that Thursday I read about the Christmas and it was how to think of Christmas differently. It's not singing in groups, it's not this, it's not that. Christmas is, think of it something different and think of it as the nativity. Think of it as
Silent Night.
That's it. And not, we put all the stuff, we put the Christmas tree, we put the balls, we put the presents, we put all, break it down to its purest form and then work from there.
All right, so I have a transformation story too then. So as an artist, I was in art school down at Old Dominion University in Virginia. And one of our projects in that class, it was to take a standard 32 by 40 mat board and transform using only that mat board, one sheet, into a work of art. It was a sculptural class. So I was into anhingas at the time, which are like the southern version of cormorants. And I took a lot of sharp X-Acto blades and I cut the board basically in half. I cut out feathers painstakingly and layered them, and I cut out the thing so it made like a silhouette. So I put a light behind it into a light box, and it was like, glowing from behind, and the light came out from behind the feathers. But I had this, so the sculpture itself turned out really good. I have a slide of it, but I did sell it right away, so I don't have the artwork anymore. But there was, I had leftover. What to do with the leftover? Because we couldn't have any leftover, and it really didn't need anything else. I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? So I sacrificed my blender for the purpose of art. I took the pieces of mat board that was left over and I pulverized them into basically like a fluffy powder kind of thing.
Wow.
And I glued it as Spanish moss on the branches of the trees.
Cool.
And there was rocks. And so there was, little stuff on the rocks too. And so it became, so I was so pleased with myself. And then the professor was not pleased with me because he said I had cheated. I'm like, how did I cheat? I used all the material. I did exactly what you specified. So I got an A on the project, but he was at first he thought I had somehow cheated. I'm thinking maybe these Pharisees and Sadducees are thinking that Jesus is cheating somehow.
Well, I think you made a really good point, both Lori and because we do have we can be very Pharisaical about Christmas. I mean, Episcopalians, when I was growing up, were very rigid.
And I'm the chief. I'm the chief Pharisee.
Well,
I'm the liturgical police. The candles weren't lit in the proper order. They were extinguished all wrong. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
And like in our house, if we didn't go to midnight mass at the cathedral, because our own parish didn't do it, midnight mass. But earlier in the day, whatever that was, 11 in the morning, we had to listen to King's College Chapel Choir do the Festival of Lessons and Carols, and you couldn't have a sound in the house. I mean, so 4 children and 2 adults and 2 dogs are all just, for an hour doing nothing but sitting, mesmerized.
So it was the parental silencing.
Every Christmas. Every Christmas, I mean, so it's interesting to think about the idea of trying to reimagine Christmas and get back to it's elemental.
Yes.
Maybe.
Well, we've
What
been
if we
forced
were
to
to
do
do
it
this-
throughout COVID. I mean, that's what we've been forced to reimagine church. You know, we've talked about it for years. I've attended more workshops and, you know, plenaries on, you know, reimagining church and, you know, being limber and nimble, according to the president of the House of Deputies during one convention, and all these urges to become church in a new way. And, you know, there might be a little change with liturgy here or there, you know. My parish in Vermont would scold me, a few people, and say, not to be innovative for change's sake. And then, but then when we had no choice but to transform, to fulfill what Jesus asks of us by becoming church in a new way this year.
Yeah, we had no choice.
Yeah.
Because when we were planning, I mean, the things that kept running through my head is, okay, we have the body of the church. We want to, what does it mean? What are we doing? And it's the gathering of the people, period. And listening and understanding and sharing the communication and the love and everything. That's basically what we need to keep an anchor on and move forward. And I mean, it's like Christmas. What are we going to do this year? What are we going to have? I mean, I love Christmas carols, but we're not going to be singing, period.
But we could listen to
We
the
can
music.
listen.
We could
listen
sit
to the
in
music,
silence and
sure.
listen to the music.
I mean,
Yes.
it's really basic, our getting together and sharing the story, the Jesus.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what Christmas is.
The Lutheran bishop also suggests it's his idea, it's just an idea. He thinks congregations should move Advent up, start Advent earlier, so that when you get to December, he advocates Christmas music. Now, I've always been a diehard for Advent hymns and Advent, but he says if you start Advent earlier, you can get in some of that. And then when December comes, it's perfectly okay to sing Christmas carols. People want to sing Christmas carols in the month of December. So
But we
I'm
can't
still
sing.
more pharisaical than he.
I was gonna be like, he and I might have to have a discussion.
This Wednesday thing is kind of my church. I don't want to minimize, I mean, I like the car service and I like your sermons and everything. But if it came down, if I could only afford to come to Winthrop one time a week, it would be on Wednesday. This is
Yeah.
what I can't miss.
I told you.
And you know what, I had that doctor's appointment, I was supposed
Joyce
to go get a
is
blood test. And
rejoicing.
it turned out to be on a Wednesday. I canceled it because I can't miss this. Like I said a couple weeks ago, that's the simplicity that's hit me out of this whole pandemic. It's the people that matter. And I need,
Here's a big hug for you.
I don't need your hugs, I just need to talk. I'm isolated, I don't have any friends or relatives, and on Wednesday, I get to open my mouth and say a few things. And that's what I need. This
Yes,
is the
yes,
most
yes, yes.
important thing to me, is to be able to discuss, to split apart and isolate some phrases and pick it apart and come up with a traditional meaning, but maybe a new meaning too.
Mhm.
And just, the little bit of fellowship that we have in this hour is the most important thing to me. So, when I commend you guys for doing that pop-up church all those years and years. I did it a couple of months and I'm awful tired of pulling those views out. Why do we need the American flag? We're not the we're not the Church of England, we're not the Church of the United States. We don't need the American flag in there. Why can't we be just as successful sitting on the friends' chairs? We don't need those pews. Put them in storage. Let's get on
We
with
paid for
the true
those.
meaning. What?
We paid for those pews.
She's a junior warden.
I'm
so
not
she
saying
takes care
burn
of
them, I'm
the-
saying store them.
So, there's this great book, if it's available still, I don't know. It was a book I read probably 15 plus years ago. Time flies. It's not 30, it's 50, right? So it's probably more like 20 years ago. But it's written by Frank Viola.
Yeah.
And I think the name of it was something like, Becoming Church, or something about,
Okay.
how we become church. And I don't recall the exact title, but I read it several times. And in a nutshell, we are a living organism. It's about organic church, so maybe the word organic is in there. And it isn't about all of our rules and traditions, and it's about leadership too. And he basically says, this, what you just described, what it means for you, he says, this is church. And it's organic. It's not forced. It just evolves naturally
Right.
into what it should become. So that's why I'm thinking of
What is
becoming
it, two or
church.
more of us joined together? and
Yeah,
he is,
yeah, John Chrysostom.
But it's amazing because Frank Viola was a great pitcher for the Red Sox.
Was he?
So I'm astounded he wrote a theological book as well.
Maybe
Anyway, I'm
it's a-
teasing. he was a
He
pitcher
could
for the
be,
Red Sox in the
baseball
70s.
is a very much of a head
I
game,
know,
so
it is,
maybe he,
I'm teasing. I mean, I'm sure there are two people named Frank Viola.
the church of baseball. I don't know.
I'm so glad you're getting what he exactly God said, Jesus said.
Yeah.
You're
Right
getting-
out of it. I'm glad you're getting it because
Yeah.
that's what it's all about.
You're
Yeah.
And you know,
getting
since this isn't advertised, it's not in LOF, it's not in any emails. If I hadn't come to that car service, I never would have known of it.
Oh, I see.
We have it advertised on the website in LOF, I think.
Yeah,
but-
I've seen
I've
it.
never seen this Bible study advertised. I've only heard you announce it, but I've never seen it in print.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
maybe
published
the-
out there,
I'll talk to you
maybe
about it.
not like on
Okay.
everything.
I
It's
talked to you about
listed.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's listed, but I'm a little like Barbara. I don't see lists all that well on
Right.
computer. So I can go to a website and I can go
Yeah.
to the LOF, and to be quite honest, half of what's there I don't absorb.
right.
Whereas experientially, when you announce it at a
Right.
service, that I absorb. I'm completely opposite from Rini, misses half of what's said even when she hears it.
Right.
But if she reads it, she gets it all.
But
There's
also
different
to be
learning systems.
transparent, I wasn't overly publishing it because I wanted to keep it somewhat protected. I wanted to make sure we were all safe.
Well,
And I
yeah, 'cause you
didn't
wanted
want-
it to be no more than 10.
I
right?
wanted it,
Yeah.
so I
Right,
felt
right.
like, if I went overboard and tried to publish it too much, that we would have too many people coming and then it would not be what it is.
But
So,
if this is kind of the future of the church, you'd have to have multiple sessions. You can't,
Yes.
you're
Well, that's-
limited
Yeah.
to 10.
But that's
Too bad for you. Maybe
Yeah.
next year there'll be a space. You can't do that either.
Well,
So you'd have to figure out how to do more than one session.
Yeah, you're
we're
right.
starting Sacred Ground next week on the 27th, the Area 5 churches. And there are 2 sessions because there are 15 people in each session. And
it went up to 30, huh?
Yeah, 30
Because it was
people
25
registered.
last night.
Yeah, well, so many people registered and there's a waiting list now. But that's what I like about that, to go back to Barbara's point, is, off and on, especially because of the K6 discussions, I know people in these other congregations and I rarely get a chance to see them. That's why I also enjoy the town halls that the bishop does, because I run through all the screens looking for people I know. And it's just nice to see them, and then in a smaller setting, because obviously when there are 150 people in the town hall, you don't hear from them, most of them.
Yeah.
But in a group because it's 2 hours long for 10 months, right? I mean, once a month. So it's a long time, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of the people. Diane Potter, for example, from Emmanuel. And she used to be St. Barnabas, but I mean, she's a really wonderful person, and I don't get a chance normally to see her. She lives the other side of Augusta. I mean,
Has anybody done EFM here? No? Oh my
No,
gosh.
Susan did it.
Yeah, I mean, I did it for 4 years after I did 2 years
Because
diocesan
Patricia
study
Buck
program.
Welton used to be
Yeah.
the one that would always let it.
Right, but
Sarah
EFM would gather in person. They had a limit of 11 people.
And EFM
But it was
stands for.
expensive.
Education for ministry,
It's like
sorry.
$100
Yep, I hate
or something.
acronyms. I
Sometimes
should have.
the church
Um,
will
it's a-
support you.
It's a 4-year program. It is still
Still
available
going.
here and there. I mean, I could even do an EFM course, become a mentor when, although they recommend it not be clergy, but because it is a lay program. But it's 1 year, is it 1 year or 2 years of Old Testament? 1 year of Old Testament, 1 year of New Testament. There's like they call, and then 2 years of what they call big book. But it's evolved now, so it's not the same as it was when I went through it. But the whole point was it was a small group gathered during the church during the school year. So it started in September, finished up in May, and it met weekly for 4 years, once a week. And part of that was really bonding as a small community and really opening up and sharing about yourself so that you got to know people. You knew that, like, Jim tried it for a year and that was about all he wanted to do. Because it was Old Testament, and every time they would start to say, and then vengeance, it was always vengeance, right? Somebody was getting clobbered in these readings. And he'd get so frustrated. If this is God's, people, then, and Joel Hill, God rest her soul, she would always say, she was a deacon there, and she would always say, now, Jim, you know that this is written by the people of God as they experienced God, because it was always about the elect and chosen. And then he'd get all frustrated. And so you knew that every week he was going to say something about that. And she would always say something back about, now, Jim, or we had we developed our own little traditions organically. So that, of course, you couldn't do this now, but there was the communion cookie, which is what I called it, because I would stop. People would get things to share, food.
Okay.
And I had to go by the Vermont Country Deli all the time to get to St. Michael's in Brattleboro. So I would stop there, and they had these cookies that were about this big. They were huge. They were bigger than the host, the priest host. So I'd get a communion cookie. Well, that's what they started calling it. And so I would offer it to somebody next to me, and then I'd be, oh, you want a bite? And then they would pass it around, right? So it was like communion bread when it was a communion cookie. So we did that for 4 years, but I mean, we could do something like that.
Jenny did EFM.
Yes.
And that was how Jenny got to know some of those women from
Right.
St. Matthew's
Yeah.
so well.
And Sarah Frost started it, but I think she became ill. I'm not sure if she finished it.
Mhm.
She did do it, I think, for at
Yeah,
least
she
2
did do
years.
it. Yeah, do some of it. Yeah.
I'm just not too sure she completed all 4 years, because then she got very, very sick.
Yeah.
But it's exclusive because of the expense.
No,
I
but,
always objected to EFM because it's so expensive.
but that's not.
The church, there was monies available
Yeah.
through scholarships and
The
stuff.
diocese will
I had
pay
hardly any
if you
money at the
want.
time, Jim was
Right.
working on the highway department, and I was a stay-at-home mom.
It's
And
scholarship,
They have
yeah.
they have a special fund. I can't remember whether the Loring Fund or the Wolf Fund. One is for clergy,
Yeah.
but the other is
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
lay, and
And
they'll pay the cost.
And
for it.
usually what they would say is, what the scholarship stipulation was, at least in Vermont, was thirds. So if it was, $300, they asked that the parish pay a third, you pay a third, and the other third would
They
come from
actually
the
don't do that.
diocese.
They don't do that here.
Yeah.
Because Sarah,
Clearly.
clearly,
Yeah.
we pay.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's always discretionary funds and things like that. So I'm pretty sure that cost would never be a
Right.
factor to not go.
But I have to say, I like this.
Yeah, well, this is,
Yeah, in addition to this, but not in place of this. I don't want to see this evolve
right.
into EFM.
No.
Right.
Joyce would
Don't you
not
mess
allow
up
it.
my Wednesday mornings.
Of course, yeah.
Can I lift Jesus' behavior in this passage into psychological realm?
Sure.
Go ahead.
And that is, what Jesus did was reframe the context for what he was saying. and reframing a context for someone who is struggling with something, it allows another way of looking at it,
Yes.
which can be transformative.